All right, so I get to pick up here, John, and so I want to introduce everybody to Mr. John Adams. So he is running for Secretary of State against Frank LaRose, that we are told, John, is the finest Secretary of State in the entire United States in terms of his commitment to election integrity, but we'll hear what you have to say about it. And I want to start out. I want to thank Mr. Adams for joining us. We see him out on the campaign trail. It's not as if per se Mark endorses John or John endorses Mark, although I can guess who. I think I know who Mark's going to vote for in this. It's as much as about citizen candidates and people that are in the conservative Republican movement standing up, stepping up, and trying to make us into a better, more conservative state in what we do and how we approach it. So, John, welcome to Mark Pukita's Ohio Truth Bomb. And I'm going to go right into questions. And so my first question, John, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Who the heck is John? I think I heard of you. You look pretty young for as old as John Adams should be at this point in time. But tell us a little bit about who you are, your bio, your background, and your qualifications.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you also for having me on. Well, I've been married to Tara for 38 years. We have 7 children. I'm a small business owner in West Central Ohio, Sydney, Ohio. We're in the furniture business, and it is 4th generation. I would not be doing this if it wasn't for my 2 sons in the last 5 years, learning the business and myself teaching it. And thankfully, it's going on to the 4th generation. Very few make it that far, and it's a good business to be in. It's tough, like every business is right now. But been married to Tara for 38 years, as I said. I served in the Navy. I was a Navy SEAL. I served at SEAL Team 3, did 2 deployments from 83 to 1987. Returned to Ohio with Tara and learned the business. I served in the 8 years. Under 2 different administrations, one Democrat under Strickland and one Kasich, Republican. I saw how it operated. When I left, I would have to say I was jaded. I was naive when I went in, and learned a lot about how it works and defining the word conservative. Everybody likes to call themselves a conservative, but boy, that word's really been misused, and everybody calls themselves a conservative in the Republican Party, and it's just not the truth. And there's very few real conservatives in the Republican Party. It's a smaller percentage than the whole. Served there for 8 years and returned, ran for the state Senate against Matt Huffman. I lost, which was a blessing. Otherwise, my 2 sons would not have learned the business. I would have been in Columbus thinking that I was saving the world, but obviously you don't. And everything worked out the way it should have. And because of that, after that last election in 2020, President Trump, the 45th president, did not win. And I said to myself, and my wife and I had a discussion, do something about it. And we decided to run for Secretary of State because our current Secretary of State has a lot of flaws.
So, John, thank you for your bio. So I noticed, and I appreciate you started with your wife, your family, and then your military experience, and your business experience. So I think you did wife, family, business experience, military experience. So you've got the whole profile of somebody. You're in your legislative experience, so you got a lot of things you threw in there. So you're not somebody just walking in the door first time, where you've been involved in politics and you've had experience. Now, I have been told that I think a lot of people know I'm friends with Tom Brinkman. And Tom Brinkman one time told me, when you're running against an incumbent, you need to have 2 things. You need to have, first, why should the voters fire them? Why should the voters fire the incumbent in favor of you? And then why should they vote for you? If they need to why should they fire the incumbent? And why are you the right replacement for that incumbent? So why don't we start? I like the exciting part first. Why should Frank LaRose be fired in your mind?
Well, it's a long list. That is a long list, Chris.
I'm
It's a long list.
watching the clock here. I'm going to give you 2
Um,
minutes or 3 minutes.
I'll do it quickly. And
Okay.
everybody can go to my website and they can look at the voter guide, but I'll go quickly. He's a never Trumper for one. Supports mandatory photo ID. He does not support mandatory voter ID. I do. He canceled the Ohio primary election hours before it was supposed to take place, and I can speak further on that later. He took Zuckerberg money, $1.3 million alone to the Secretary of State's office. That does not include the 44 counties that also took money under his supervision. He supports online voting. He supports automatic voter registration. He wanted to mail every single registered voter in Ohio a ballot. He supported
that.
Yeah, he supported drop boxes in every county throughout Ohio. He accused President Trump of racism. And he was a board member on it's called Kids Voting. He was a board member on it, and the Secretary of State's office supported it, and it taught critical race theory. Once that was exposed, he dropped off the board and no longer supports it. That's his list. It's not a good list. And to answer it, I can do a better job. Simple as that.
So you're already jumping to the next question. Why are you in his place? Why are you the best replacement for Frank LaRose?
Because I'm tough. I believe in voter integrity, for one. I want to see a mandatory voter ID, which we haven't had. You can walk into a polling place and present yourself 7 different ways to vote. We only need one: strict voter ID. That needs to get passed by the legislature and put into place.
Okay.
That's one.
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You personally what?
Well, I personally saw, like, when the election was postponed, the primary election, when we decided to change space and time on the calendar, that I don't know if I told you this. I think I told you this. I did some record request and found out that Frank LaRose, his press release was drafted by the governor's office. And one of the things I think that grassroots and citizen candidates are worried about is a lack of check and balances between these people who are oftentimes not conservatives. You mentioned LaRose being a never Trumper. You said you were tough. Do you think that you can be a check and balance between the other statewide elected officials who have R's behind their names when it comes to these election integrity issues?
I can tell you that it would not have caved to the pressure from the governor to change that date. The Secretary of State's office is its own office. It's a constitutionally, by the Constitution, it's its own office. And I do not have to do what the governor tells me to do.
Right.
The only person that could have changed, Chris, the only person that could have changed that would have been the legislature. Yeah, that's the only authority that changed the date on that primary. And it was only 4 days prior that he stood there at a podium with Amy Acton and said, we went to extraordinary measures to make sure that this election is safe. 4 days later, it gets canceled.
And I think had Richard Cordray been governor and made the same request to LaRose, what do you think the response would have been? Totally. It shows you the lack of check and balance by how they behave differently and how they're not necessarily really conservatives when they behave differently. As long as the person has an R behind their name, I'll let them do something that's against our Constitution that I would never let somebody with a D behind their name do.
Correct. And that I witnessed that when I was in office for 8 years. We fought tooth and nail against Strickland. As soon as it switched to an R, we had super majorities in both chambers, and it was the opposite. Everything we fought for and against on Strickland, we could have implemented in the Kasich administration, and we didn't.
Right.
We didn't. Not one bit. And
so it becomes show. It's conservative show versus conservative heart in terms of the way a lot of these people react.
Heart and mind. Heart
Right.
and mind. And like you said, checks and balances. And then it goes right back to one single word: Constitution.
So
checks and balances.
Okay, so let me ask you another question here. Move on here. If you were Secretary of State, what are sort of the top, you mentioned voter ID, but beyond that, what are the top 2, 3, 4 things that you would think should be changed about the office, would do differently? What would be your key agenda points?
Agenda point number one, as I said, would be voter ID, strict voter ID. And when we're talking about voter ID, currently we don't check to see if they're a citizen. That's not checked. That would need to be checked. The other thing I would do is it's not a new idea. I'd set up an office for voter fraud. My initial thoughts on this were the prosecutors need an incentive to prosecute fraud. There isn't any. You can't throw money at them because it's political. Whether it's a D or an R, you can't rely on that. Governor DeSantis, in his budget proposal, said, "Look, we're going to prosecute fraud. We're going to set up our own department, and we're going to have investigators. We're going to have everything that's required to prosecute fraud." And he said, "You know what? When you start prosecuting fraud, voter fraud, people won't do it anymore." And that's what we have to do, because I don't care what state it is. And a study just came out by I'm pretty sure it was Heritage Foundation. We're ranked right in the middle of all 50 states. For Frank LaRose to say that we have the best secure election system in the nation is phony. It's complete
Right.
phony. Bottom line is we've institutionalized cheating. We don't look for it.
Right.
We don't look for it unless somebody just blatantly gets caught. We don't look for it. Well, as your next Secretary of State, we're going to have a division that prosecutes fraud. A division all on its own. That's what I want. That's what I'm going to request.
I think I'm, John, about as conservative as they come. And I remind people, though, and this is a controversial thing to say, that one of our biggest election integrity issues in Ohio is a Republican scandal involving Larry Householder and corporate money being used to buy seats in our legislature, particularly, I think, more in already red districts. And so what's your kind of take on the kind of things that we've seen as scandals amongst Republican people, like bribes with Larry Householder, Cliff Rosenberger before that, looking the other way on ECOT with those kind of things. But, I know Democrats like to talk about campaign finance limits, which I don't think is the problem at all. I think the problem is basically dirty money getting into the mix. What's your reaction to that? And what kind of policy views would you have? You're not the legislature, but you've been a legislature as Secretary of State, cleaning up financing in our campaigns from a standpoint of where the money's coming from.
Well, regarding that, I was there for 8 years, and how we kept the caucus elected was exactly the way that was done. I'm not talking about House Bill 6 at this point. I'm just talking about the way the money came in to fund campaigns. And then all that went into a pot, and the leadership spent it. The campaign leadership spent it. And, if your polling wasn't good, they'd move on to the next race. But a lot of money in Columbus, the lobbying,
Right.
and it needs cleaned up. It needs cleaned up. Now, the Secretary of State's not going to clean that up, but the legislature itself, needs to take a hard look. And that's not even said. Just clean it up. Just clean it up. Just recognize the problem and do something about it.
Well, and I think that the Secretary of State's office plays a vital role in terms of campaign finance reporting and campaign finance reporting accountability. And I think Mr. LaRose has been completely derelict in duty and on that front. And you have to, it is always in Ohio, if people pay attention, any of the scandals that come to light are always because the feds get involved, because our actual statewide people don't, they don't come from there. So let me move on to the next question. I just saw that you were endorsed by Ohio Value Voters, so congratulations on that interest group endorsement. So how you feel about getting the Ohio Republican Party primary endorsement, and where do you stand on the Ohio Republican Party primary endorsement process?
I'll be happy to take the Ohio Republican Party endorsement in the general.
That's called the voters voted you through,
but not in the primary.
Right.
I sit on the our county Republican Party, and we changed our bylaws when we took it over 2 years ago. Okay. And we said we will not endorse in primaries anymore. That is for the voters to decide. We are going to stay out of it as a county, and that's the way it should be in every county and statewide, in my opinion. Obviously, there's other people that want to be kingmakers. And they don't see it that way. But that leaves out the voter. The voters aren't. Frank LaRose is there because they want him there.
Right.
The Republican Party wants him there.
You mean he's not a product of a popular uprising of voters that love Frank LaRose?
No.
So, okay, my last question, then I'll get some of your closing thoughts. What is up, John Adams, with when are we going to see a Secretary of State candidate forum? And why isn't somebody like Jack Windsor or, some of these other groups that have done forums like the Center for Christian Virtue, why aren't they're very excited about doing Senate forums, which is an open seat, but they aren't so excited about doing forums where there's incumbents in office. What's your reaction, and what do you see on the horizon in terms of any candidate forums around Secretary of State?
It does make it tough for outside candidates to take on incumbents. It just does. They have the advantage up and down the chart, period. They just do. It's the way it works. I get it, but I don't think he would debate me anyway. I don't believe he would. But I would love to debate the guy because his record is lousy. Nobody knows it. And that's what a debate would do, is expose what he's done as Secretary of State, which it's not a good record when you look at this. It just isn't.
Well, I think the key is that those people out there, maybe Jack Windsor or somebody else is listening, they should just call a forum. If Frank LaRose doesn't show up, isn't there, then you get more time to answer questions, and it says something. I mean, to me, as Republicans, we should stand for voter education. And I saw a clip that I think somebody on Mark's team actually made of LaRose getting all testy with people, asking him questions where somebody was videoing him. And I tell you, when our candidates don't have to be in forums and they get protected from them, it makes for weaker people. It makes for weaker people, less in touch with the citizens, and with less of a feeling of what people really care about because they're in an ivory tower. So I hope that somebody will get some forums going. Have there been any forums for Secretary of State?
No, and I can see why at this point. Once everybody is filed and we've all cleared the hurdle of our petitions, I think you're going to see an uptick in voter interest, and you might see a candidate forum for Secretary of State. I'd like to see it.
I think we'd all like to see it. I think. I wish you the best of luck. I will commit to, I'm giving you my personal endorsement, which is worth
well, thank you, Chris.
It might be worth, I have a lot of friends who are my neighbors are friends, and I'm all for personal endorsements. I'm not for organizational or party endorsements in particular, which are meant to rig the system. But I appreciate, I've gotten to know you just a little bit thus far in at some events, and I appreciate you standing up and win, lose, or draw, primarying Mr. LaRose to have a real discussion within the Republican Party about what do we stand for? Like, why on earth would we have a Republican Secretary of State that is not for universal voter ID? That is crazy. That is not Republican.
It's not Republican, and it's not something that's pushed in all the states. I mean, some yes, but most no. And I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. It's a simple concept. Everybody understands it except the political party.
Right.
I don't get it.
Right.
You need that ID for everything.
Well,
that'll eliminate a lot of fraud right there.
I'm going to close with this, and I'm going to bring Mr. Pukita on for a second. My wife right now is taking a friend of mine from Poland to the airport. And I tell you, and if you've been overseas, if you go to places and you say to them that it's actually a debate in the United States as to whether you have to show an ID to vote, they cannot believe that that would be a debate. I've been in over 50 countries, and I've probably asked the question to probably in 20 of them at least. And there's not another country that I'm aware of that doesn't believe that you have to have some proper ID to be able to vote. They're shocked that it's even a discussion here.
Yes, and that tells you something. I just recently read an article. I looked at the date on it. It was 2015, and it was exactly what you're talking about. All the European countries over there are shocked that we don't have a strict voter ID in this country.
Right.
And you know why? Because it permits fraud, and it's institutionalized for decades, and it happens in all the major cities.
And it says a lot about it. If you would believe what the Democrats say, that it's too hard to get an ID, then it's also, they are condemning an educational system that after 12 years can't teach people enough in school to be able to get a proper ID to be able to have a productive life. It is enslavement if that is the case. Now, I'm going to bring on Mr. Pukita, who has informed me he has a set of 18 additional questions he would like to ask.
Yes, John.
Let's
start with question 1, subsection A. Now, I just want to say thank you for coming on, and maybe if no news outlet will do a debate or a forum with you and Frank LaRose, maybe we could do it here on the Truth Bomb. So I'll make you the offer, and I'll make Frank the offer, and I'll do it on social media either tonight or tomorrow morning, that you come on and you just have a conversation about why each of you is the best candidate. Would you be okay with that?
I'd be fine with that.
I would throw on there too is that you'll let Frank LaRose. Now, John, you may or may not like this, but I'd say Frank LaRose can pick the moderator and he can make the rules. So if he wants it to be that he gets 3 minutes and Mr. John Adams only gets 1 minute. So we want it to be, I always love to have it be so ridiculously fair, like that he can pick the moderator. Mike DeWine can be the moderator if that's what Frank LaRose wants.
Over the top fair.
Fine. I'll take whatever rules are thrown at me. I'd love to debate the guy.
And he was a Green Beret and you were a Navy SEAL? Okay. So
Correct.
You both have those credentials.
That's true. I factored that in when I decided to run. It nullifies our military differences. It's fine. I thank him for his service, and
I'm sure he's vice versa. I mean, we just have to get to the substance of the matter here, and it's voter fraud.
Correct.
Well, it's voter fraud. It's voting integrity. It is educated voters. It's campaign finance. It's all these things that I feel like Frank LaRose has no real agenda on. It's integrity to the Constitution. He outright went against the Constitution when he changed the primary election. And it's a series of things. I can't imagine a Democrat Secretary of State would have done more dumb things along the way as Frank LaRose has done.
Bingo.
Right. As a matter of fact, if you just look at the list that he's compiled, it's not far from Stacey Abrams pulled off in Georgia.
Right. Including
it's almost identical.
I saw your communication today about the 1.3 million from Zuckerberg that LaRose took. We got to move on. So John, what's your website? Why don't you tell people your website so they can check it out?
Website is johnadamsforoh.com. johnadamsforoh.com.
The number
And-
4 or the word 4?
The word 4. Sorry about that.
Okay, so
One
different
thing I
than
want
Mark.
one thing I want to add before you
Yes,
kick
sir.
me off. We need to audit. We need a forensic audit to look under that rug that's never been looked at ever. That nobody's looked under the rug. So we don't know where it's at. But I
Right.
guarantee it's there.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Adams, for joining us. And we are going to move on, Mark.
John,
You
thanks
and
so
I-
much.
You and I.
Thank
to
you both
segment
very
2.
much, and you have a good evening.
We're going to move on to segment 2, which is going to be on February 4th, the next ORP meeting.